PSN Pass. I swear I've heard something similar to this before. Seems quite a few people aren't too pleased about this, and honestly, I can't really blame them. But I wonder if people are upset for the right reason. I wonder what really brought this on. Are the actions of the gamers to blame for this? Or does the fault go to the used market? Is Xbox Live an easy target to put the blame on? Or are the developers getting more greedy? There's so many different things to blame, but which one's truly the guilty party? This one's gonna be fun. PSN Pass, said to be a program that includes a single-use registration code that grants the account holder redeeming the code full online access for that title. Something that, while it's been around for years, is new to the PS3, and with this, the blame is being thrown around all over the place. But where does the blame really go? The way I see it, there are 4 groups that play a role in this, and that's the gamers, the developers, the pirates, and the used market. The big fight going on seems to revolve more around the gamers and the developers, yet the pirates and used market are the main reasons for the actions taking place. There seem to be a lot of different views on this topic, and with those different views, different groups end up taking the blame for PSN Pass. So the questions of the day are, why did Sony do it and who's really to blame for it? Where do we begin? Let's start with this. How did we get to this point where the industry wants to take more money from us? The easy answer to this is, they're greedy. And while the easy answer can be the right answer, coming to this type of conclusion without really thinking about it in other ways may cause us to miss something. Now that doesn't mean that we automatically dismiss this answer, but we can't simply say greedy then act as if we just solved the problem, since we can't solve a problem if we don't know what really caused it. To solve a problem like this, guys, we need to throw feelings out of the window because feelings can create biased answers. So are the developers starting to become greedy? The only way to answer that is to ask, would this have still happened if piracy in the used game market didn't exist? I'm sure some of you will say yes and some will say no. However, as we can see in the gaming world, the rules are starting to change and a lot of people aren't too fond of this change. I'm sure as hell not, and I don't think any serious gamer is either. However, there's a big difference between not liking something and understanding why what you don't like is truly happening. When something like this occurs, I think the best thing to do is find out if something similar has happened before. And as some of you know, it has. It's been mentioned before, but console game developers weren't the only people having a problem with things like piracy. I believe the PC market had the same problem, but much worse. And the best example I can think of, since I played it damn near all the time, was Diablo. Speaking of which, Blizzard needs to hurry the hell up with Diablo 3. But I digress. I believe Diablo was one of the first games to really have this problem. Some of you might think, yeah, but that's the PC, this is a console problem. And while you are correct, I think the PC actually played a major role in it. Think of it as the merging of 2 worlds, which at first seemed like a good idea. However, looking at it now, I feel it was an idea that was both good and bad, but the negatives outweighed the positives. One world I call the console world, and the other world I call the PC world. These 2 worlds to me were probably better off separated from each other, as both worlds followed a different set of rules that when combined caused more problems than it did solutions. And this may have been done intentionally. The console world was a lot safer for developers because in this world, developers had more control than the gamers did. Now I know that may sound like a bad thing, and I'll admit in some scenarios it was. But what this means was that developers couldn't get lazy with their games and still expect them to succeed by simply adding things into the game that should have already been put in them in the first place. New features added to games weren't added by paying for them, but by simply playing the game and figuring out ways to unlock those extra characters, levels, or what have you, be it by playing the game or learning a secret code. You guys remember secret codes, don't you? All in all, this worked out perfectly because developers couldn't pull the same stunts in this world, especially if they were new developers. The PC world, however, was a completely different story. To me, this world was more safe for the gamers than it was for the developers because here, the gamers had more power. If the developers didn't go by the gamers' rules, they would end up paying for it. Because if the PC gamers didn't want to pay for your game, then you can best believe they would find a way not to. All it takes is a PC gamer with the right know-how and they can take complete control over it. In this world, the developers were at the mercy of the gamers. So how do you counter something like this? No matter what you do to a disc, people can find a way to convert it to a digital format and copy it. There had to be another way, and I believe there was. Blizzard seemed to be one of the companies to get screwed a lot by this, and while I'm not going to say Blizzard did it first, I am going to say that they did it before consoles did. Blizzard figured, if you can't stop people from pirating discs, then the next best thing is to stop them from being able to play online with said pirated disc. And how do you go about this? I think you guys get the idea. So how did this end up affecting consoles? Well, this is where my merging theory comes into play. When it came to the console world last generation, it was obvious that Microsoft didn't stand a chance against Nintendo and especially against Sony. However, while Microsoft didn't have much power in the console world, the PC world was a whole different story. Which meant if Microsoft couldn't take over in the console world, they would have to try and take over gaming in the world that they had not only more power in, but more knowledge as well. But in order to do this, they would have to find a way to bring Sony and Nintendo into that world with them, otherwise the next Xbox could end up being seen as another type of PC. But how do you do that? Simple. By making their main feature a common thing for consoles. In other words, make online play the norm instead of just an extra feature. But in order to pull this off, chances are they would have to release their console first so that the competition follows instead of leads. While I'm not sure if Microsoft did this intentionally, I'll leave that up to you guys to decide. What they did was merge the console world and PC world together with their main feature, Xbox Live. And by doing that, certain rules of the console world no longer had to be followed, and things that didn't happen in the console world were now easily able to happen. Developers could now take advantage of gamers with the use of DLC, and gamers could take advantage of the developers with piracy, something that, while I'll admit still happened, especially on the Dreamcast, poor thing, wasn't as easy to do with consoles like the GameCube and PS2. While DLC didn't seem to be that big of a problem at the start of this generation, as we can see, developers are really starting to go overboard with it now. And then there's PSN Pass. Now, as I said at the start of this video, I see 4 groups that are responsible for what's going on now. I also see 5 events that play a major role in all of this: piracy, used games, development cost, online gaming, and DRM. Each one of these events affects each group in some way or another, but not always the same way. Let's start with piracy. For gamers, piracy plays a negative role because piracy gave the developers a reason to start using registration codes. It also played a negative role for the developers because it ended up costing them money. Pirates could care less since they will always just try to find a way to get a game for free, and the used game market suffers because of the developers' actions to fight against piracy. What about the used games? For us gamers, this is a positive thing because it prevents us from having to pay full price for used games, so we can actually wait for the price of a game to go down before we purchase it. For the developers, it hurts them because a lot of the money they could be making goes to the used game market instead. For pirates, it doesn't really matter since they don't intend to pay for the game regardless if it's used or not, and the used game market is raking in all of the money from the work done by the developers. Then there's development cost. For gamers, the cost doesn't matter as the price of most new games will still be $60 regardless how much money went into the development cost, which means we can either wait for the price to go down or buy it used. The developers seem to really get screwed here because if they spend millions of dollars to develop a game and it doesn't sell well, or the used market ends up getting more money off of the profits than they do, they end up hurting in the end. And as always, pirates don't care how much a game costs to develop, as their main goal is to try to not pay anything for it. And once again, the used market ends up getting paid for the developer's work no matter how much the game costs to develop. Then there's online gaming. For the gamers, it plays both a positive and negative role. It allows us to play games online with other people instead of only being able to when we have friends over. It plays a negative role because it allows developers to take advantage of us through DLC. However, for the developers, it also plays a positive and negative role. As I just said, it allows them to make more money from DLC, but at the same time, it costs them to keep the servers up. And a lot of the money they could be using for this is going to the used market. Now here, the pirates don't benefit because while they can find ways to get games for free, playing those free games online isn't as easy to accomplish. And as far as the used game market goes, they don't really play much of a role here since they don't really make money off of online gaming, just from the sales of the games people are playing online. And finally, we get to DRM. Gamers here get the short end of the stick since they won't be able to play online if they buy a used game that uses DRM. For once here, the developers actually benefit since this will prevent the used market from cashing in as much as they used to on the developers' work. And if the used market does cash in, the developers will still get a piece of the pie. Pirates here are in trouble since while they can pirate a game, pirating a registration code won't be as easy. And the used game market suffers here because gamers may simply say screw it and buy an original copy of a game instead of a used one. So my final question goes out to those of you that do not like the PSN Pass idea, which is damn near all of us. Can you think of a way to stop piracy while at the same time make money for the developers and stop the used market from cashing in on the developers' work, but without pissing off the gamers? It's not an easy task. It's quite difficult to please everyone, and no matter what you do, someone will find a problem with it. When we look at this, do you notice that the developers seem to be getting screwed the most? Does it make more sense now why we have PSN Pass? There's no question that it sucks for us gamers, but a lot of gamers want to fight against the developers when the main problem was piracy and used games. But gamers aren't going to fight against used games because it's how we save money, and that creates a problem in the whole circle. A lot of us support used games. The industry is fighting against used games, thus they're also fighting against a lot of us. So my answer to what's causing this problem is, well, us. We support the used game market. The used game market hurts the industry, but the used game market wouldn't have succeeded without our help. A lot of people seem to have an I don't care about the industry, it's all about me kind of attitude. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But now they're starting to see that the industry has the exact same attitude, and they don't like it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the real world where most people only care about themselves. Gamers want the industry to look out for them though. Guys, most of us are adults now. The industry's not gonna titty feed us like a lot of people want it to. We have to look out for ourselves now and not sit and point the blame to whatever we just so happen to hate. People will blame the developers, the used market, piracy, Xbox Live, and even other gamers who play a console they don't like. How can you solve a complicated problem like this simply by pointing the blame on what you don't like? To me, the problem is us in the used game market, but how many of us want to get rid of a market that's been saving us money for years? And of course, the pirates aren't really making this any easier. I see the main problem here is more of a situation of every man for himself and not it's everyone's fault but mine. Neither one of these groups are really looking out for each other. They're just looking out for themselves. That's why we buy used games, developers are trying to stop used games, pirates are trying to get everything for free, and GameStop continues to sell used games. It's rather amusing that what started out as Microsoft versus Nintendo versus Sony slowly turned into gamers versus developers versus piracy with the used game market as the special guest referee. And it seems that no one knows where the blame is really supposed to go. Each one of these groups will put the blame on what they hate. Gamers will blame either piracy, the industry, and or the used market, like I do. The industry will blame the used market and piracy, the pirates will blame the industry, and the used market will continue to make all the money. From this view, I truly believe that everyone is at fault, but because we all see it differently and blame different things, this type of problem will not be fixed by most of these groups. The only ones that seem to really be fighting are the game developers, and PSN Pass for us gamers was a low blow. Guys, remember how this generation started and a lot of people were trying to tell us to support the industry, and now a lot of the same people are saying we need to fight against the industry? Guys, gamers never needed to intentionally support the gaming industry, and hell, for the past 3 decades, they never did. Support of the gaming industry had nothing to do with us trying to find ways to buy specific products of what we considered the best quality then try to force everyone else to buy it. Our support of the industry was nothing more than us buying different consoles and games and either enjoying it or being pissed off that we wasted our money on it. And all the ones we enjoyed we continued to buy, and the ones we hated we stayed away from. This pretty much told the industry everything it needed to know. Our gaming addiction supported the industry, and the industry supported our gaming addiction. It worked out perfectly, and in a way, us supporting the industry was completely accidental. There was no planned steps, methods, or tactics in how to purchase or not purchase what others believe helped the industry. The success in games and consoles came from the majority of gamers buying a specific game whose reputation grew due to most gamers enjoying it and spreading the word of how much they enjoyed it. Don't you guys find it somewhat ironic that the one generation where the gaming industry is doing all kinds of things that seem to screw us over just so happens to be the one generation where everyone was trying to tell us how to support the industry? When no one cared about the industry and instead this was simply a hobby that helped pass the time, the problems were few and far between. Once people decided that the industry needed their help, everything started going to shit. The assistance we gave the industry before had nothing to do with an arrangement of agendas created by people that believed the industry was in dire need of their help. It had to do with us purchasing and playing what we as individual gamers enjoyed the most. In other words, our support of the industry ironically worked best when we didn't intentionally try to do it. And now we have a huge problem that we can't solve because we will continue to do it, since while it doesn't help the industry any, it does help us. And with the way the economy is now, who can really blame us? Well, besides the industry. I'd actually like to hear some of you guys' ideas for how we can prevent a problem this complicated, because we've been blaming what we don't like for years now, and as we can see, that's got us absolutely nowhere.